The second I stepped into the warehouse, I could feel it, the kind of silence that presses against your ears. It was my first solo night shift, and the rumors I'd heard about this place danced nervously in my mind. Why did everyone avoid the night shift? Tonight, I was about to find out. As I began my rounds, the first odd thing I noticed was the lighting. Some of the security lights were out, turning hallways into tunnels of shadow. I tried shaking off the uneasy feeling creeping up my spine and focused on the sound of my footsteps echoing off the concrete walls. That's when I heard it, another set of footsteps, dragging and slow. It paused when I paused. Silence. I spun around, flashlight cutting through the darkness, but there was nothing there. Just rows of metal shelves and sealed crates. I continued, trying to keep my nerves in check, telling myself it was just the building settling, or my own echoes playing tricks on me. That's when I saw the surveillance door slightly ajar. My heart skipped a beat. I was sure it had been closed when my shift started. I pushed it open, the creak of the hinges making me wince. Nothing unusual inside, just the usual banks of monitors. I secured the door again, making sure it was locked tight this time. Returning to my desk, I decided to check the cameras, hoping to catch whatever might be moving around up there. As I scanned through the feeds, one of the cameras flickered, and for a split second, I saw a figure, a shadow really, darting out of frame. I rubbed my eyes, thinking sleep deprivation was getting the best of me. I rewound the footage, but the figure was gone. Just a trick of the light? Noises started up again, closer this time. A soft thumping, like someone or something bumping against the walls. I grabbed my flashlight and radio, deciding to investigate. That's when I realized my radio was staticky, crackling with strange whispers. I couldn't make out the words, but the voices definitely weren't any of my coworkers. I shook the device, smacking it against my palm, but it only grew louder. As I ventured towards the source of the noises, I found something chilling, marks on the dusty floor, as if heavy feet had dragged something across. The trail led me to a stack of boxes that had collapsed. It looked fresh, the dust disturbed around the edges. And there, in the middle of the chaos, a heavy chain swayed gently from the ceiling. There was no breeze in the air. My heart raced. I was not alone. The air grew colder as I moved deeper into the warehouse. I could see my breath now. It wasn't just cold, it felt like a warning. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed through the building. It came from the old storage area, the part of the warehouse we were supposed to avoid due to its instability. Against my better judgment, I headed there, my flashlight's being my only companion. I reached the storage area, the door creaking ominously as I pushed it open. Inside, it was chaos, boxes overturned, papers scattered. And there, in the center of the room, was the figure I'd seen on the camera. He was real. He turned, his eyes wide with fear, or maybe madness. He was dragging something heavy, a mannequin, its limbs askew. He dropped it and screamed, "Leave now, or you're next." Before I could react, we both heard footsteps approaching. He grabbed my arm, his grip ice cold. "They're coming," he hissed. Did I dare believe him? My mind raced. Was this the game he thought he was trapped in? There was no time to question it. The footsteps were getting louder, and fear had us in its grip. We ran, dodging through back corridors and hidden exits he knew well. The footsteps never far behind. We burst out of a side door into the cold night air, panting and disheveled. As I called the police, he vanished into the darkness, leaving me to explain the night's horrors. Days later, after my nerves had calmed and the police had searched the warehouse finding nothing, I thought it was all over. But then, a message arrived that chilled me to my core. Did you really think it was over? No, I suppose it wasn't. The warehouse still stands, and sometimes, when the night is still and the air grows cold, I wonder if what happened was real or just part of the game. And if it was a game, who else is playing? I never believed in curses, not until my first night on the third floor. They say the hospital I worked at was a maze of shadows after dark, but that night, it was as if the very walls whispered secrets meant only for me. As I started my shift, the departing nurse threw me a look, half joking. "Watch out for the third floor's curse," she said. Little did I know, her words would echo in my mind until dawn. The halls were quiet, too quiet, with only the hum of the fluorescent lights overhead and the occasional beep from the monitors. I checked on Mrs. Allen, the lady who had been muttering about shadows watching her from the corners. I reassured her, pulled her blankets up, and tried to laugh off her fears. But as I left her room, a chill ran down my spine. It wasn't just the cold, it was a feeling, as if eyes were following my every move. As the night deepened, those empty corridors seemed to stretch on forever. The lights above flickered more often now, casting large, menacing shadows that danced just out of sight. Then came the noises, soft, almost inaudible cries and whispers that seemed to seep out from behind closed doors. I told myself it was just the wind, or the old building settling, but a part of me couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. The heart monitor incident was what really got to me. I was doing my rounds when I noticed one of the monitors spike suddenly. The heart rate was impossibly high, and just as I reached to check on the patient, the monitor flatlined. I froze, my heart thumping in my chest. But when I checked, the patient was sleeping soundly, not a single sign of distress. I reset the monitor, and it returned to normal, but that sense of dread stayed with me. Curiosity got the better of me, and I found myself drawn to an old section of the ward that was supposed to be locked. The door was slightly ajar. Inside, it was like stepping back in time. Dusty medical equipment lay scattered, and faded photographs of past patients stared blankly back at me from the walls. The air was cold, unnaturally so, and I felt a weight in the atmosphere, as if the room was holding its breath. Then, the power cut out. My flashlight was weak, a thin beam against the engulfing darkness. That's when I heard it, a loud crash from the end of the hall. Heart racing, I moved towards the sound. My footsteps echoed in the empty hall, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was following just behind me, mirroring my every move. I spun around several times, flashlight sweeping through the darkness, but there was nothing. Only shadows and silence. I reached the source of the noise, a supply room where a shelf had fallen over, its contents strewn across the floor. As I righted the shelf, the air grew colder, and I felt a sudden rush of air, as if something had rushed past me. I didn't wait around to see what it was. I ran back to the nurse's station, barricading myself in until the morning light could chase away the darkness. When the morning staff arrived, I told them everything. They listened, but their eyes said what their mouths didn't. They thought I was just another rookie, spooked by the night shift. But the older nurse, she knew. She gave me a look that said she'd heard this story before, and quietly, she suggested that maybe the third floor wasn't for everyone. As I left the hospital, the sun was rising, casting long shadows on the ground behind me. I overheard a conversation about a patient who had disappeared decades ago right here on the third floor, on a night much like last night. I stopped by the records room on my way out. Hidden in a dusty corner, I found an old file about the incident, the details chillingly similar to my own experience. I don't know if I believe in curses, but something haunts the third floor of that hospital. And as I left, with the morning sun high in the sky, I couldn't help but feel that some part of me had never left that old, dark ward. Maybe part of me never would. It was supposed to be just another night shift at the mini-market, but by midnight, it turned into the longest night of my life. I started my shift like any other, clocking in as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the store's empty parking lot. The store, a beacon of fluorescent light in the encroaching darkness, seemed more isolated than ever. My buddy Rich was already there, counting the till with that nonchalant smirk he always wore. "You ready for another thrilling night of scanning canned beans and restocking toilet paper?" he joked as I stashed my jacket in the back. We laughed, but our chuckles were cut short by a sudden flicker in the overhead lights. "It's just the wiring," Rich said with a shrug, but his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. We went about our duties, me at the register and him restocking, but the lights continued their erratic dance, casting strange shadows that made me jump more than once. I tried to shake the feeling that we weren't alone. Around 11 p.m., the door chime rang through the quiet store as a man, looking wild-eyed and frantic, burst in. He was out of breath, his clothes disheveled. I watched him pace up and down the aisles, muttering to himself, occasionally glancing over his shoulder like he expected someone or something to be there. When he finally came to the register, his hands were trembling as he handed me a crumpled note along with his money. He leaned in close, his breath foul, his voice a harsh whisper. "Don't let them in," he said, before bolting out the door. I unfolded the note, the scribbled words reading, "Watch out for the watchers." Rich came over to see what the fuss was about. "What did that guy want?" he asked, peering at the note. I told him, and we both laughed it off, but unease nestled in my stomach like a coiled snake. Not long after, the sense of foreboding grew. The air felt thicker, charged with a silent alarm. Shadows seemed to move just at the periphery of my vision, and I noticed Rich was on edge too. He kept checking his phone, jumping at every notification. Then came the sound of breaking glass. It shattered the silence and our false sense of security. Masked figures appeared at the broken doorway, their movements deliberate, malevolent. Rich grabbed my arm, pulling me towards the office. "I'm sorry," he hissed as we barricaded ourselves inside. "I didn't think they'd actually come." I stared at him, my heart pounding against my ribs. "What are you talking about?" Rich was pale, his eyes wild. "I owed some bad people a lot of money. They wanted inside info on the place for a quick hit. I thought it was just a small-time thing." Anger flared within me, but fear quickly doused it. The door shook under the weight of our assailants trying to break in. I looked around desperately and grabbed a fire extinguisher. "If we get out of this, you're going to jail, Rich," I growled, handing him a heavy flashlight. We stood shoulder to shoulder as the door finally gave way. The figures surged in like a dark wave. I swung the extinguisher with all my might, connecting with a sickening thud. Rich was swinging the flashlight, backing them off step by step. They weren't prepared for a fight, and their hesitation gave us an edge. Just as quickly as they had burst in, the sound of sirens sliced through the chaos. The attackers hesitated, then turned and fled into the night. Rich and I collapsed against the wall, breathing hard, the adrenaline slowly ebbing from our veins. The police arrived minutes later. Rich was handcuffed and taken away after a quick but heartfelt apology. I gave my statement, my hands still trembling from the ordeal. The officers mentioned that the frantic man from earlier had called them, his paranoid delusions perhaps not so delusional after all. As dawn crept over the horizon, casting a pale light over the mini-market, I sat in the quiet aftermath, reflecting on the night's terrors. I knew one thing for certain: I would never work another night shift again. The risks hidden in the shadows of the mundane were too great, and I had come too close to losing everything in a few terrifying hours. That morning, I walked away from the mini-market for the last time, the rising sun at my back, and a vow in my heart to find a safer path forward.